Never ever forget the cardinal rule of the Minnesota Vikings. It can always get worse. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Today is Town Hall Tuesday. That means I am answering your questions as submitted to me via the Google form in the show notes. You can fill that out whenever you want. Give me a question, give me a hot take, which I will do some of those at the end of the show, or you can give me a bold prediction for the upcoming game. I'm not going to be able to really do a lot with those in the week because of the short week. But we will pull back around to all of that and the bold predictions from the game against the Eagles. There is a controversial issue we got to deal with on that, but we'll circle back to all of that. So make sure you give me your bold predictions as well. But for now, we'll do the questions everybody submitted. The first one comes from Procrastinating Grad Student. A couple of them from Procrastinating Grad Student, which, buddy, you shouldn't be doing this. You submitted 2 questions. Did you submit your homework? You got to do that. Procrastinating Grad Student says, it seems like Carson Wentz is custom made in a lab to drive KOC insane. Hindsight is obviously 2020, but how would you have handled the backup QB position differently this offseason? Here's what I'll say. At the time, I didn't think Carson Wentz was that bad of an idea. And I still am not quite sure he was that. He's a backup. And I think the expectations placed on him have warped the conversation a lot. What you want with a backup is, hey, if your QB goes down with a high ankle sprain, he'll get you 2-2. Well, that's exactly what we got. So I don't know if signing him as the backup was that bad of an idea. Most of the argument I have made against him, most of the times I've come at him super hard, have been from the context of people who want him to continue to start, which he is not good enough to do. And I think the Vikings walked into week 1 saying Carson Wentz is our guy and he's going to be our QB of the future. We would have some conversations to have about those decision makers. But as a backup, I would say the way they ended up, I mean, here's what you probably would have not done the Sam Howell thing, right? Bringing Carson Wentz earlier. So he had a whole training camp and maybe you would have been able to upgrade the playbook. He was sitting there all year. Or all offseason. He was not on another team and you had to wait for him to get cut. He was a free agent. So you could have signed him in March, had him do the whole offseason program with you, and you may have gotten better results and then not messed with the Sam Howell thing where you trade for him, then cut him. I guess that would be, in hindsight, would have been a better idea. And it was something that I think I did suggest in March. But I don't think that he's been bad for a backup. He's been only good for a backup. And actually, let me really quick, before we get into the other stuff, again, I think I said this yesterday. It's been a theme of the year that we've kind of mistaken good for a backup for good, period, right? Blake Brandel as a center was good for a guy who didn't play center. He wasn't good, period. He was good considering the circumstances. Carson Wentz has been, I think, fine for a backup. As a starter, not up to snuff. As a backup, okay, yeah, you're going to put up with a bunch of terrible mistakes from a backup. You kind of just want somebody that's going to mostly pilot the ship and hopefully you can win the game in spite of him. And they've been at least close in all of those. But for a starter, the bar is obviously a lot higher. And I think that has affected things like the bar that we apply to JJ McCarthy, because he has to be the starter, because he has to be the future, because they drafted him 10th overall, is higher, and probably rightfully so, than the bar we apply to Carson Wentz. But we just have to be careful not to mistake that vibe of who is, rising to their occasion and who isn't for, equal playing which player is actually better. And I do think a little bit of that has happened. The other one from Procrastinating Grad Student reads, I haven't been this frustrated watching a Vikings QB play football in years. But as you often remind us, it could always be worse. The question is, which current QBs, starters or backups on other teams, if they were to become the Vikings' temporary starter, would be worse than watching Carson Wentz? Well, So I'll start with this. I would say that there are quite a few people. I mean, the Vikings could have had Jake Browning, right? I think that was worse for the Bengals. The Vikings could have had one of these like old guy, could have had a Russell Wilson debacle and then not had, a young guy to turn to in the way that the Giants have had Jackson Dart. But I think one of the big saving graces about the vibe here with Wentz and why the only way it bothers me is if you suggest that it goes on longer than it should. This is a temporary state of affairs, and it's all short term, which is why I'm like, I think there's a lot of prisoner of the moment going on. That even elsewhere in this mailbag, there's a lot of stuff that feels like it's reacting to this week as though every single game of the season has been just this week over and over again and forgetting what happened earlier in the season. But in like 10 days, we're done with this, right? Like, in maybe even in 3 days, we're done with this, depending on how the injury report stuff goes. A practice estimation put both Carson Wentz and JJ McCarthy as limited participants in practice, which is distinct from last week where Carson Wentz was a full participant. Well, now that shoulder has him limited in it on a short week. I don't know. I mean, everybody's on their own plan, right? So it's not worth speculating too hard, but like that could also change things. So this is a short-term state of affairs. But in terms of teams that have it worse than the Vikings with Wentz, I mean, you can point to a whole bunch statistically that have been way worse than Wentz. And I've sort of made the argument for why the statistics heavily overrate Wentz. But like, you could be looking at a Geno Smith situation being where the Raiders are. I'm taking the Vikings spot 10 times out of 10. We at least we know who we're turning to. The Geno Smith thing is a disaster. Pete Carroll might be a one and done. And the Raiders might just be hopscotching from rebuild to rebuild to rebuild. You could be in a situation like with Bryce Young, where it hasn't been good enough, or with like Tua Tagovailoa, where it hasn't been good enough, and you have no clarity for what the next step is. You just know it's not this. Or something like the Jets with Justin Fields, where you kind of knew he wasn't the future, but like the Jets have had an infinitely harder season to watch if you're a Jets fan than the Vikings have with just the 4 Carson Wentz games, let alone, even accounting for the pain of watching the future of your franchise lay an egg on primetime against Atlanta. Boy, the Jets have just they've laid a few eggs. It's been really, really rough. Or the Titans, who are supposed to be, a young upstart and they can't get it together. There's a lot of teams that are in worse spots than the Vikings right now, because the Vikings have this unknown hope that maybe after a little time to kind of rest and decompress and reset, JJ McCarthy can come back and be a little bit better and show you a little bit of hope for the future of the franchise. Cam Ekstrom asks a similar one. Help me settle an argument. Nick Mullins wins that Eagles game by double digits. Hard to say, because Nick Mullins would throw twice as many picks. I mean, the dude was so good at throwing 4 interceptions in a game. He was deeply, deeply unsafe with the football, but probably better at operating the offense in general. So I think if you ended up with a sustained amount of Nick Mullins, rather than the sort of piecemeal you got in 2023 and he never won a game. But with Nick Mullins, you would get a lot of production, but enough turnovers to ruin it, and you couldn't get a win. So I'm not sure you can say, yeah, Nick Mullins definitely gets that one, because I don't know, he might just throw worse picks. You can't really prove to me that he won't. And those, like what we saw in this game, you can have a bunch of great production and then throw an interception or ruin it in the red zone and walk away with 3 points and then lose the game. Dirty Mike and the boys asks, how much do you think teams take into account a game being a primetime game? Should the expectation be that Wentz probably starts for the Chargers as well? It's a primetime game on a short week in LA and would be JJ's third start and third primetime game in his career. Would the game being on primetime have much or any bearing on the decision? Probably not. The short week, maybe, if you're worried about practice plans or rehab time or whatever, if he would be ready by Sunday but not by Thursday, that could affect things. But probably not the primetime aspect of it. Being under the lights and all that stuff, guess what? It's the NFL. You're always on national TV. And enough people have Sunday Ticket and Red Zone that you're being on a nooner isn't exactly being in a hidden community theater. Okay, this is all the big time. So I think if you're hiding your starting QB from prime time, it's probably over. The 14-yard line that tackled Danny Dimes. This name has aged so weird, man, The 14-yard line that has tackled Danny Dimes has been a question asker for like years. And it's like since that happened. And boy, has it been a weird 365 days for that username. Anyways, he asks, it feels like a constant critique of Kevin O'Connell's that he gets in his own way, playing Brandel at center instead of Jurgens, but there are other examples. Is this problem unique to O'Connell? Do coaches with a similar problem have a track record of ever figuring it out? I don't know if you can really look at track record because everybody's their own person, but yeah, coaches kind of outthinking themselves and making bad decisions. Yeah, this is a thing that happens all the time where you go, oh yeah, we're going with the backup because he had a good game and he's the hot hand, and then the hot hand is no longer hot, and then you go back with the other guy. I mean, this is all over the league all the time. Do people ever figure it out? I mean, the answer is always going to be sometimes, and it depends, and there's not really going to be a definitive thing. I'm not exactly going to go like chart out all the start-sit decisions that didn't work out over the last 20 years. That's a question for your AI super lord that'll come kill you and your family in 10 years. Chris asks, why did it feel like Justin Jefferson always gets his catches in spurts? Like he'll either have a drive where he has 3 catches or 0. I would be curious to see how true that is, but I definitely get the vibe, like how much that really does play out in reality. But I do get that vibe. And I wouldn't be shocked to learn that there's a real reason behind it in the way that like defenses play, where they'll come out in a drive and either get caught in a personnel, or they'll say we're calling a bunch of man coverage in this drive, and then that's when Jefferson gets open, or the Vikings find an exploit and they spam it a bunch. But yeah, the kinds of thing, that kind of thing does make sense, and I would kind of expect it to be a little streaky, just because of the way the cat and mouse game like plays out when you're trying to get a guy like that open. I have a whole bunch more questions, including some stuff about the defense, the special teams, etc., and of course your hot takes. That'll all be next on Locked On Vikings.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go, while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Mazda. Move and be moved. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIH Top Safety Pick awards than anyone else. They craft cars for those who want to do more than simply move from point A to point B. Every little detail matters, just like it does on an NFL field, and those details contribute to your experience, from the Japanese craftsmanship and all the details on the outside, the metallic accents on the inside, Napa leather upholstery, and you can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like NFL players, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Moving along with the Locked On Vikings podcast, unless you're listening to this, like the second it comes out, there will be a Patreon video releasing. It's like an hour after this podcast releases, about Carson Wentz. I'm not going to belabor the point on a short week about how I feel Carson Wentz played against the Eagles. I don't think it was good. I went back to the film. I double checked it. I did not change my opinion after doing that. And I showed my work in that video. So if you want to check it out, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. The next question from this mailbag comes from Rogers Fraud Watch, who asks, is Isaiah Rodgers actually good at what matters for cornerback? What a great question. What does matter for cornerback? I feel if you asked 10 different D-back coaches, you would get 10 different answers. So what does matter for cornerback is like just as debatable. But here is what I'll say about Isaiah Rodgers. This is one of these prisoner of the moment things. He's had a fantastic year. He had a bad game. We shouldn't default. I feel that there is a reflex, especially among sports fans, that are constantly waterboarded with the take economy in all media that you ever consume. Every show on TV is takes. Rankings. Who's better? Comparison. It's MJ LeBron debates all the way down. And when our brains are just like bombarded with a hailstorm of takes, we feel as though there's this reflex that whatever the last thing you saw is the true referendum on what that is. When the Vikings have a good game, listen, see, you should have believed in them. Here's why they're so good. Kevin O'Connell coaches. When they have a bad game, I knew they were frauds. I knew it was really bad. And that goes on a player-by-player basis too, right? People were saying Isaiah Rodgers is going to be Defensive Player of the Year after that Bengals game. And now they're saying, is he even good? And you're not the only person who sent in a question like this, by the way, Rodgers Fraud Watch. So don't think I'm singling you out. But I would say we probably should have the cognitive skill to chalk up a bad game to why it happened, what happened on those plays, why did you get beat? I think he took the cheese a couple times. Shouldn't have done that. Those were bad mistakes. Chalk them up as bad mistakes. Those were bad plays, right? Put them in the bad play column. And then when it's time to actually ask the question, referendum on is Isaiah Rodgers good or not, you're not looking at the most recent thing with a bad taste in your mouth. You're looking at the entire body of work for the whole season or his whole career if you want. And from that, I would say that Isaiah Rodgers' aggressive play style, relying on his makeup speed, is a pretty good plan most of the time and got punished pretty hard by Devonta Smith, who is a particularly very fast receiver. I don't think there are a lot of teams that have the receiving core like A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith to repeat that. So I'm not losing my mind over it. Devonta Smith's really fast and was able to punish that. And the Eagles know Isaiah Rodgers really well. So it's not super surprising that if anyone was going to expose him, it was going to be the team that coached him for a couple of years. But that aggressive style also leads to making really good plays up at the line of scrimmage, making good tackles, pass breakups, heroic moments. And yes, the turnovers against the Bengals game also come from that. So this season, as a full body of work, I'm still very satisfied with. This game takes a little bit off the top of that. And if you continue to have games like that, the conversation changes, and that's how things evolve over the course of the NFL. But so far, I don't have a problem. Sketch Conk says, what were the Vikings doing with Tyler Batty? There was the tush push thing, but I noticed him out there on another down and was curious why we had him in. Yeah, I guess they just want him. They just see him as a rotational guy on the defense. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, healthy scratch, by the way. Tyler Batty in instead of him. So I think he was doing that role, which I find interesting because I would not say that what we saw from those two players in camp in the preseason would tell you that that's what you should do at all. But this team apparently has no idea who's good on their depth chart or not. So I guess it's a crapshoot. I no longer am willing to respect, they played the guy as a sort of sneaky way of saying Tyler Batty must be better than Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. I don't think that's true because that has not borne out in other position battle moments on this roster. So with the tush push thing, they were essentially had him lay down in front of the A-gaps, which is very hard to move. You can't really get a push on that because of friction. And then both Jalen Redmond and I think it was Eric Wilson jumped over the top. So you had your low, you had your high. That was when I did all my tush push breakdowns going into this game. That was what I said you needed. You need your low, you need your high, and you need somebody squeezing off the edge. So they had all that. And the low was instead of two players diving forward, you have one player lay down. And I guess the player that they value the least because that's a very sacrificial role. My wife thinks Constantine is a good name for our unborn son. Chime in the comments if you agree. Let's have YouTube comments name this person's unborn son. That's probably good for them. Says, we hear a lot about post-buy adjustments or player bumps, making tweaks to the scheme and getting certain players more involved. Is this something teams really focus on during their bye week? Is the bye week treated as a moment for reflection and adjustment in a way that other weeks aren't? Kind of, yeah. What you usually get, I guess every team does it differently, but I believe what you get on the bye is players are not required to show up. Players go rest. You aren't practicing. You aren't going, full pads, super hard. Go get your rest. coaches now don't have practices to plan or deal with, and now they can use that time for a self-scout and say who's playing well, what should we do on the depth chart, what kind of schematic changes should we have, which is why you're sort of expected to come out of the bye a little better than you went into it, right? You're doing a bunch of work, theory work to try to improve. You should be smarter. So when you come out of the bye and you lay an egg, it might mean that you made decisions over the bye that were bad. That, you maybe shouldn't have had that time. It was your chance to overthink things, or you installed something that didn't work. And now, if you've done more harm than good, which happens to a lot of teams, right? The succeeding on the bye week or failing on the bye week is not that different from succeeding or failing in a random week of the season, right? You either had good ideas or bad ideas, and it's kind of hard to know ahead of time what's going to work or what isn't. But yeah, the coaches have time without having to worry about practice. So yeah, they do a lot of that work. Ben asks, what's behind the struggles of both kickoff units? Boy, do I have the podcast episode for you. If you go to last Monday, I think the title of the episode is The Key to the Dynamic Kickoff. I had Kevin on here. He's a big special teams guy, and we went over a lot of the kickoff theory, but also what was going on with the Vikings. I would say the return unit has been reasonable. They have the return unit has been the one that struggled a lot. There's a schematic issue. I think they've just got bulk issues, but the kickoff coverage has been really good as long as they get a good kickoff from Reichard. They're not always getting a good kickoff from Reichard, and I think that's something that he struggled with. Obviously, you take that for the 59-yard field goals, but something to be part of the calculus. Another special teams question. How's Ty Felton looking? Any chance he contributes as a receiver or just special teams this year? Probably not as a receiver. I think he's got as much chance to be a contributing receiver as like Bo Richter has to have. Less than Bo Richter. Then I don't know. Like he hasn't been part of the from scrimmage rotation. Tim Jones has been they were happier to put Tim Jones in the from scrimmage rotation, and Tim Jones is no longer even on the practice squad. So I think that tells you how they feel about Ty Felton as a receiver. As a special teamer, hot mama, that dude is cooking. That dude has been awesome as a special teamer. So it's clear that that's just his role. Purple Sheeple Eater asks, what's with Jonathan Grenard's quiet season? I know sacks and splash plays aren't everything, but after such huge hype coming out of training camp, I can't help but feel a little disappointed. This is another one I got a bunch of questions about, like, where's Jonathan Grenard? Why has he been quiet? I have no idea what you guys are talking about, to be frank. He had a quiet game. Is this another one of those things where we forgot that there were other games and we just looked at the Eagles one? Quiet game against the Eagles. Credit to the Eagles O-line. They have one of the best in the league. That didn't really trip that caused any confusion for me. Like, you just got a dub against you took an L against a good unit, but he's been fantastic and he's been doing the job he needs to do. This is the thing about D-line, that like the person who logs the pressure, logs the sack, logs the tackle is not the only person who contributed to that play. And sometimes it's not the guy that contributed. It can be the guy that contributed the fourth most to that play. And so instead you have to look at what was their role on this play and did they perform it successfully? And I find myself very rarely looking at Jonathan Grenard and saying no to that question. So I think Jonathan Grenard's having a perfectly fine season. I know that there was like a bunch of hype coming out of camp and the more is required and all that, but I think that fell on its face for a lot of people. This team is significantly worse than last year, and it's not just the change at quarterback. Miserable in Minnetonka asks, was the D really so bad? They only gave up 21 points. That would have been enough for the win despite the terrible QB play. Well, it would have been enough for the win if there weren't a pick six, right? I would say, so not despite the terrible QB play, despite most of the terrible QB play. It's hard to define, but I think you're onto something here, right? Where the Vikings had, from like a success rates perspective, a fantastic day on defense. From a total like EPA perspective, a horrible day on defense. And when the difference between success rate and EPA is stark, it tells you there were explosives. So it's really hard to be like, okay, you got a bunch of 3 and outs, but you also gave up this busted coverage, 72-yard touchdown because Isaiah Rodgers made a bad play. And it's a little bit like asking, besides that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? I'm sure the play was great, but that's something else happened that kind of ruined all of that. So it's really hard for me to credit that as a good game when explosives really defined the day. And the Eagles, they had like a historic day for their franchise. That said, the things that led to those plays are far less concerning to me than your average you gave up a perfect passer rating kind of day. So I'm not going super hard at the D. I think what happened to them, they did have a bad day. You can't chalk it up as a dub. I don't like at all. But I don't think anybody's panicking, I guess. I've got hot takes coming up next here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, and the Vikings are on Thursday Night Football. If you want to get in on the action, now is a great time to get involved. But after Thursday Night Football, whether you want to take the Vikings at +3 or the Chargers at -3 or any of the other bets involved with that, there's going to be a Red Zone Sunday and a Monday night game that you maybe don't even care about and a whole bunch of other stuff going on. Like, you don't care about Titans Colts, but if you're new and you would like, you can put $5 down on whatever you feel confident in and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Just pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. That bet could be on the Indianapolis Colts money line. They're favored by 14.5, and that money line is worth -1,200. That's no juice at all. But for you, if you're new, you get 60-1 on that puppy. So whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into all of the little details, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Moving along with the Locked On Vikings podcast, let's get into some of your hot takes. And you have some absolute scorchers in this one that I really, really love. First one comes from Brandon, who has one that I think is a little bit less hot, but still a hot take. Says Max Brosmer is the best option to run the offense effectively on Thursday. He's the least talented in the room. I don't know if that's actually true with how broken down Wentz's body is, but that's not your hot take. However, he knows the offense, has plenty of experience in poise, and will play the way KOC wants. Okay, so there's a few things here. It is a hot take, and I appreciate the hotness of this take because this one is pretty hot. But Julia Daniels actually said the same thing. Well, she's a huge Gopher person, but she was on the squad show with us. She's usually on it on Wednesday. She was on the Monday show with us on Monday morning and said the same thing. Said, hey, maybe it's time to think about this, because she's a huge Gopher fan. But she brought up a similar idea. Like, he has a lot of experience for a rookie player. That said, in the preseason, the mistakes that we saw him make in that preseason, as good as that preseason was, better than Brett Rippon, we were evaluating that from the perspective of, should he be QB3? And the answer was yes. That's great. But when we started talking about QB1, the bar rises. And I do think that you can have 15 years of college experience. I will still consider you an inexperienced NFL quarterback. The game is just that different. And we've seen those differences get to J.J. McCarthy. I don't really think we should consider Max Brosmer any different just because he has a few more years of college experience. I just don't think he's the least talented in the room. I think that's we've seen them all run now, okay? And I'm pretty sure Wentz is losing the race. Leon has a great scorcher. I love this one. Coaches should not be allowed to ice a kicker attempting a record-setting kick. He submitted this a long time ago after the Packers-Bengals game. Last week after the Packers-Bengals game during the Vikings bye. But also says more broadly, icing a kicker is cowardly and poor sportsmanship. I love it. This is a scorching, blow my face off take. Because no, it's not. It's an idea in your pocket, and I think if it causes the other guy to miss. There was actually a quote from Doug Peterson. He went on I think like a Barstool podcast or something, and he was talking about the double doink. And they had actually pulled a stat about how Cody Parkey fell apart after getting iced, how icing really worked against him. And I think if you can call a timeout and it ruins the field goal, that's a problem with your kicker, not a problem with the strategy. Get good. But I super agree with your first one. Coaches should not be allowed to ice a kicker attempting a record-setting kick. Let's just let that thing go. The real problem I have with icing the kick is that it takes longer. We all just have to look at our phones for 45 more seconds just to wait. Yeah. it does suck. It like takes a lot of the air out of the moment, but I don't think it shouldn't be allowed. Use every resource at your disposal. Nobody should be vilified for doing that. Doomer's on top says Quessy effing up the QB position this tremendously, in addition to the relative lack of impact from drafted players, means his time is running out and he will be gone by 2027 at the latest. The draft stuff is losing its teeth now that there's been literally any time. You're seeing some guys work, some guys not, and it's really evening out. The 2024 class, especially day 3, is looking really great. Even that 2022 class still has like a Jalen Naylor in it. You still have undrafted successes and stuff. So like the ability to get young talent, which is probably more to the point of why you want drafting to be good, right? To get young talent. But I always notice that the people who say you can't draft, like conveniently leave out all the undrafted dudes that have done a lot of stuff. Which I don't think you can do that if you're trying to argue it in good faith. And just as time goes on, it's evening out and you're losing a lot of teeth in that argument. But also 2 games in, saying he screwed up the QB position is pretty hot to me. Your take about whatever he did about QB should have been, well, we don't know yet. We'll see how it turns out when they drafted J.J. McCarthy, right? Anything else, you were being presumptuous. We've seen 2 games. If 2 games can change your opinion that much, you're being too reactive to 2 games. And the fact that he had a meniscus tear and a completely unrelated other injury does not mean that he's going to miss all of his games for the rest of his career. Again, just because it's like a lizard brain pattern thing. We see the bug go by and we go, well, the bug's going to go by again. Like, what happened yesterday is not what is going to happen tomorrow. Very famously about the NFL. Second to last one comes from Lou, who says, what's up with Travion Henderson? He's been utterly disappointing despite all of the preseason hype. Not Vikings related, I know, but I go listen to Locked On Patriots for that, I guess, because I haven't watched a lot of Patriots at all. But I will say, just generally broadly, let rookies be rookies, man. He's a rookie. The NFL's different than college. Let it happen. You know who we were like, man, whatever happened to that guy? I thought he was supposed to be so good coming out. Bijan Robinson got questions like that his rookie year. It worked out okay. Give people a second, a half of a sec. It's week 7, man. Chill. Nobody's book is closed the first year they play. Ever. Nobody's book is closed. You just can't do that. If you do, you will be wrong a lot, and you're going to have to end up reopening those books. Last one comes from Arif Hassan was soft benched. Okay, you guys, a lot of you asked questions that were like just asking me to like rag on Arif and Sam because on the squad show they disagree with me about Wentz. They just disagree with me, man. You're allowed to do that for now, at least in America. You're allowed to disagree with people. It's fine. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna talk crap about them on my podcast. Okay, stop asking me to do that, you drama hungry freaks. Anyways, Arif Hassan with soft bench asks, if JJ comes back and doesn't wow us and we ultimately end up with a higher draft pick, the Vikings should at least do considerable work on the 2026 QB class. Between the injuries and the play, I don't think JJ has given us anything to prevent us from passing if we felt the opportunity to draft a top tier QB prospect. I think from a general principle perspective, you're probably onto something. Like you even if JJ McCarthy played well, you probably should do good work on the QB class if you have a top 3 pick. And I know this isn't what you're saying, but you could kind of back into being right because you're going to want to do that in case you want to trade out of the pick. You want to know who the QBs are and what the landscape looks like so you know what kind of business you're doing. But the idea of you should consider, trading your Josh Rosen and taking your Kyler Murray, I get it for sure. If there's somebody that's like a total can't miss, and you definitely should figure that out. Even if JJ McCarthy comes back, plays well, gives you hope. But it does sound a little bit like you're giving up on a player after I must bear repeating. It bears repeating. 54 dropbacks. He dropped back 54 times in his NFL career. If you are trying to write the book on this kid, you are the one overreacting. Bar none. Talk to y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.